camera, just as you would be visible during in-person meetings. Finally, mute your microphone when not speaking. Public comment will be via telephone only. To speak during any of the two public comment opportunities, please call one of the following two toll-free numbers: 877-853-5247 or 888-788-0099, and enter the meeting ID number 956-8718-7870 on your phone. This information is also available on the published agenda in the public notices section of the city's website, on the broadcast of this meeting on CTTN channel 16 and AT&T channel number 99, and online at www.a2gov.org/watchctn. Joe, would you please read the land acknowledgement?
Yep. I acknowledge that the land of the city of Ann Arbor occupies as the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe, including Odawa, Ojibwe, and Bodewadmi and Wyandot peoples. I further acknowledge that our city stands, like almost all property in the United States, on lands obtained, generally in unconscionable ways, from indigenous peoples. The taking of this land was formalized by the Treaty of Detroit in 1807. Knowing where we live, work, study, and recreate does not change the past, but a thorough understanding of the ongoing consequences of this past can empower us in our work to create a future that supports human flourishing and justice for all individuals.
Thank you very much. We're going to take the roll call now, but before we do that, just a few comments. Both Joe and I received input that several commissioners won't be joining us tonight. Commissioner Harp, Commissioner Cunnin, Commissioner Kerber, and also Councilmember Adina indicated that he's going to be coming late. Both he and Councilmember Briggs attended an incredibly long administrative meeting this afternoon, and I just want to acknowledge and have the rest of you understand how committed our council members are. I mean, it is amazing how much they do in terms of public service. Just yesterday afternoon, we had an over an hour meeting looking at new applicants for vacancies that we're going to have on the Energy Commission. And it's just amazing that the work that they do. And frankly, I appreciate all of your public service, but especially theirs. So Joe, if you would continue with the roll call, that would be great.
Yep. Commissioner Maycomer, not seeing yet. Commissioner Levin.
Here from my home in Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Mirsky.
Here from my home in Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Colvin Garcia.
Here, Ann Arbor.
Councilmember Briggs.
Here in Ann Arbor.
As noted, Councilmember Adina will be running a little late today. Commissioner McCoy.
Here, I'm calling in from State College, Pennsylvania.
Commissioner Kerber, as noted, will be unable to make it. Commissioner Overpeck.
Here, Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Smith.
Here, Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Conan, unable to make it today. Commissioner Zittelman.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Commissioner McKenna.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Harp, unable to make it. And then Commissioner Berkowitz.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Chair, you got a quorum.
Very good. Great. So we have an agenda, interesting agenda tonight. Is there a motion to approve the agenda posted on Legistar? And a second. So moved by Commissioner Colvin Garcia. Second, please. Seconded by Commissioner Zettelman. Any comments, additions, concerns? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the agenda, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Approved unanimously. Thank you very much. We also have minutes to approve. They are also posted on Legistar. Hopefully people have had a chance to skim through those. Is there a motion to approve the minutes as posted? Also motion moved by Commissioner Calvin Garcia, seconded by, did I see a hand? I'll raise my hand. Okay. Also Commissioner Zettelman. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor of the minutes, please raise your hand and say aye. Everyone, here we are. And we have Commissioner McCumber joining us now as well, and she was in time to vote to approve the minutes as well. So that was a unanimous approval. So public input. This is an opportunity, the first opportunity for persons to speak for up to 3 minutes. If you're watching on CTN, please call 888-788-0099 or 877-853-5247 and enter the meeting ID 956-8718-7876. This information is also displayed on the meeting agenda and the video feed. Staff will select callers that have raised their hand one by one using the last 3 digits of your phone number. To electronically raise your hand to indicate your desire to speak, please press *9 on your phone. You will hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. When speaking, please move to a quiet place and mute any background noise so that we may hear you clearly. Please state your name and your address at the beginning of your comments.
I don't have anyone right now outside of Councilmember Radina, who I don't believe calls in for public comment.
No. Welcome, Councilmember Adina.
Give it another 15 seconds or so, but
Sounds
no one
good.
right now. All right, I do not have anyone here.
Okay, very good. So we'll move on in the agenda. And the next point is a discussion on Ann Arbor's hydropower capabilities. And we are fortunate to have Public Works Department Head Brian Stiglitz with us tonight. Thank you very much for joining us, Brian, and for spending your private time in the evening with us. I know you do this often and it's appreciated. I thought I might start with a few introductory comments. I sent a link to a podcast that I went back and reviewed again, and I thought that there was some interesting summary level statistics about hydropower. This was a Volts podcast hosted by David Roberts. And he had as his guest Jennifer Garson, who is head of the Department of Energy's Water Power Technologies Office. And I found the following interesting. There are 90,000 dams in the United States. Only 2,300 have hydropower or generating hydropower. So that's just a little bit more than 2.5%. About 1,700 thereof produce less than 10 megawatts. And of the 87,700 non-powered dams, about 600 have the potential of generating 1 megawatt of power. And that would represent 90% of the total of 13 gigawatts of new hydro power potential. So 13 gigawatts, just to give you an idea, that's pretty significant. DTE is building a new power plant, and it's a natural gas power plant, and it's 1,100 watts, or basically 1 gigawatt. So hydropower potential that's unutilized or untapped in the United States is really pretty significant, and it's obviously clean and renewable. So with that, no further ado, Brian, I'll turn things over to you, and then we can also open things up for discussion, but I thought you might have a lead in of your own.
All right, thank you. And can you hear me okay?
We do.
Thank you for the invitation tonight. I indicated, Joe, that I didn't have a presentation, but I do have, I was able to pull together a few slides that maybe I could talk from if I'm able to share my screen, if that's okay with everybody.
Yep. And you should have the capability to share, I think, but let me know if you don't.
It says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Let me see if I can fix that. Okay, I promoted you co-host, so you
Okay,
try.
now I can.
Okay.
Okay. Are you seeing my slideshow?
Yes, we
Yep.
do.
Okay, great. So I'll start with this. Feel free to interrupt with questions. This can be as informal as formal as you would like. This is a presentation that we did and put together. You can see the date, March 2019. So it's several years ago, but I think some of it's relevant, and I think a lot of it is on point for maybe some of the things that you're interested in hearing about. And I'll use this as talking points. And it's not the complete presentation, but it's parts of it that I thought would be relevant for you all today. So a little bit of history about the city's dams. They were constructed in the early 1900s. Our capacities total between Barton and Superior, which are two of the four dams that we operate and maintain along the Huron River. Those are the two with hydropower. We can generate about 1.5 megawatts between the two at their full capacity. Obviously, that is flow dependent, so we are not getting 1.5 megawatts all year round. It's, the flows go up and down. I believe actually we do report to the state, and I think we do post our hydropower production. So it is on our website. So you can see the daily hydropower production at Barton. And there's a variety of reasons for that. But anyway, that is posted and available if you are interested in seeing how that changes throughout the year. 1.5 megawatts can power about 500 homes for context. And then you can see on the slide what the associated carbon offsets would be based on this production amount. So from a financial perspective, if they're producing at what our targets are for the year, so that's not full 1.5 megawatts, but we base it based on what the seasonal production rate is based on flow in the river. We're talking about, just under $500,000 per year in revenue between the two dams, Barton and Superior. When you look at what the operating costs are for Barton and Superior, Barton can be a moneymaker, just barely. I guess a little more than barely, and in general, Superior is a loser. So we don't break even on Superior. And there's a variety of reasons for that I can go into if you have questions about that. These costs reflect the typical average annual operating costs for the facilities. So as we need to make capital investments in this infrastructure, and I'll show you a little about what those costs are, over time, we're not breaking even because the revenue doesn't really support the capital investments to operate and maintain the dams. The dams were moved to the general fund in 2006. So before that, they were in the water fund. And that was a conscious decision that was made. A lot of it was around because it was the revenue source. But originally being in the water fund, obviously Barton provides the impoundment for the city's water supply. So it makes sense for that impoundment to be associated with the water system. The hydro portions of both of these are in the general fund, but the cost of operating the Barton impoundment and the dam is split between hydropower and water, the water fund. And that is, again, because the impoundment serves two purposes. It serves one purpose to generate the impoundment so we can make hydropower, but it also serves the purpose of the impoundment for the water supply. So while all the revenue goes to the general fund, the costs are split between general fund and water fund. The city has a long-term power purchase agreement with DTE for the power generated at both of these facilities, and it expires in 2036. So I think it was a 50-year agreement, so pretty long term. The costs don't escalate, so they are what they are. And it's somewhere in the neighborhood of about 5.5 cents per kilowatt hour. There are two components of the cost, but when you roll everything up, that's about what the cost the city gets for the power. In terms of costs for operating, maintaining the dams, we have the structural costs, which is the embankments, the structural concrete, the gates that operate, and then of course the power generating equipment. So some of these costs are, the capital costs tend to be you make the investment and it can last a long time, but on the power generating equipment, in order to keep that running, we're making investments at some frequency depending upon what the needs are, but we're rebuilding a lot of the mechanical components on the order of every decade or so. So it's a recurring investment in order to maintain the hydropower production piece. This is a little bit outdated, but I updated some of it at the bottom, but I just wanted to give you an idea of what some of the costs look like as we go through time. This was again 2019 presentation, and we identified at that point what some of the upcoming costs would be, capital needs. And they're highlighted at Barton and Superior, and you can see sort of the order of magnitude of what the costs are. But then if you look at the bottom, and this is, so most of everything that is identified in 2021 and 22, almost all of that has been completed. But as we look towards the future for Barton and Superior Dam, you can see there's some big numbers. Barton and Superior both have some concrete and structural repair needs. There's some embankment issues that we have to deal with at Barton. What we see is that Barton and Superior are regulated differently than Argo and Geddes. Argo and Geddes are state regulated dams. Because of the hydropower production, Barton and Superior are regulated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So it's a completely different requirements. There are some parallels, but a lot more of a robust safety program, inspection program. The cost of operating those two dams are multiple times the cost of operating the state recreational dams. And that's reflected in some of the capital needs and the things that we need to do in order to maintain and meet the safety requirements. Obviously in Michigan, we have a recent history of a dam failure. So that has really changed the whole outlook and the regulatory environment for dams across the country. And we're seeing that in terms of what the cost of operating these facilities are. When we did this analysis in 2018 or 2019, we were looking at the long-term viability of hydro generation for the city, and we looked at the pros and cons. We developed and looked at some different alternatives. I'll share a few of those with you. But we looked at the financial, portion of the business, and is it financially sustainable? We also looked at, the environmental impacts, community impacts, things like that, and I'll share a little bit about that. And I didn't talk a lot about this, but I mentioned that in 2036, was it, when our contract expires, there are some challenges that we will be facing in terms of the revenue that we get for hydropower production. And this is regulated under PURPA. And there are certain requirements for what we call, and what we are is a QF. It's a qualified facility under this regulation on what our revenue potential is. And DTE and consumers in Michigan have been challenging the current requirements on how we are compensated for the power we produce, and it's not favorable. We have commented on some of the, with our legal support team on some of the things that are being considered. We think that this is still a long way out, 2036, but the challenge is that, we make investments in the hydropower, and the payback on some of them can be 15 to 20 years. So the investments we're making now are starting to be in the window of what our anticipated future revenue needs are. So it's a conversation that is timely, and we need to be thinking about that as we invest in hydropower. Are we going to have the revenue to support the investments that we need in the long run? So the financial outlook is not that rosy. So what are some of the assumptions, that we made in this analysis? Well, we looked at our historical operations and our historical capital expenditures and what our reinvestment in the infrastructure is, mostly on the mechanical equipment side, and I'll show you what some of that looks like. We forecasted our capital needs as part of this analysis for the next 30 years, and our revenues also for the next 30 years. And then when we looked at Superior, one of the things we considered was, should we take it out as an alternative? And we evaluated what the environmental impacts and costs associated with that are. So there's sediment that's accumulated behind the dam. Based on what the content of things like heavy metals in there can be significant costs associated with remediation that we would have to make sure that we were prepared to deal with if we ended up taking out that dam. So the things that we looked at, the alternatives, we looked at 3 alternatives at Barton and 3 at Superior. This is sort of graphically shows, you see the figure on the left, which shows the dam with the water flowing over it. That's keep the dam. It's not X'd out. The second figure, which shows the power lines, are if it's X'd out, it means we're going to decommission or not generate hydropower anymore. So the top 2 options involve not decommissioning hydropower, but keeping the dam. And then the second option was, well, if we decide to change our mind, there's obviously a cost of decommissioning and recommissioning, but we wanted that evaluation to be completed. So that was alternative 2. And then the third alternative is just, we continue to do what we're doing. And the rehabilitate means we're going to reinvest in the mechanical equipment to make sure that we can continue to make power. Because we could still operate the dam and not reinvest in hydropower, because we can't take the dam out with Barton because it provides the impoundment for our water supply. So while Superior, there's an alternative we'll look at to remove the dam completely, that is not an option at Barton. So the options and alternatives are keep the dam, stop decommission power, full dam removal, and then rehabilitate, which is reinvest in the hydropower production portion. This scenario, looked at in terms of how does these different options at Superior align with our city planning goals. If we don't generate hydropower, which is option 4, we don't have the same impact on our carbon footprint, greenhouse gas emissions. It decreases our renewable energy portfolio. So those are both negatives, obviously. If we take the dam out and return to its normal state, there are ecosystem benefits associated with that. There may be recreational opportunities that are benefits, and some other things that we've identified here. And then obviously, if we rehabilitate, we have the benefit of continuing to help this meet our renewable energy goals for the community. So that would be in the third option, or what we call option 6 here. So I just wanted to give you an idea of what some of the infrastructure looks like, because this is big stuff and it's not easy to operate and maintain. And the expertise requires a lot of specialty equipment. This is what the hydropower equipment looks like at Barton. And it's big, heavy mechanical equipment. It's very complicated. We used to have teams who could work on this, but maintaining the expertise to work on this type of equipment, which is specialty, has been difficult to maintain. And as we've had people retire, we've just decided we can't continue to reinvest in having our staff have the expertise, because we just don't have the resources to commit. So we're now contracting out when we have to do heavy rebuilds of this equipment. Here's a picture of the turbine at one of the dams. And, it's really, really difficult to get down and work on this stuff. So the rigging and everything is really complicated. When we did our last rebuild of Barton, it took the better part of a year to do the work with a contract expert who this is what they do. So this isn't simple work. One of the challenges that we have too, and why Superior is particularly problematic, is because Barton is a vertical turbine. The Superior one is installed on a 45-degree angle. So it's a very unique installation, and it's extremely difficult to maintain. There's not many of these, so the expertise there. The rigging is really difficult because things don't come out vertically. So you're having to do special setup in order to remove the turbine and access some of the things that you need to access down inside the turbine shaft. So very difficult equipment to operate and maintain. So this provides sort of a high-level summary of the options. Green would be a good thing, red is bad, and we looked at the 6 different options, 3 at Barton and 3 at Superior. We looked at the impact on the ecosystem, recreation, education stewardship, greenhouse gas, and renewable energy. So this just provides sort of an overview summary of the options that were considered and how they ranked against each other qualitatively. And you also can see at the top the net present value of what the costs associated with these are. You can see they're all negative. I wouldn't get hung up on these numbers because the cost of things have increased pretty substantially. So it's actually not, the costs are going to be sort of a fair bit more than these now if we redid this analysis. But you can see at the time even, the net present value for each of these alternatives are all in the negative millions. So it's costing the city. The revenue that we're getting from the hydropower will not cover the cost that we need to continue to operate these facilities into the future. So what were the recommendations that came out of this then is at Barton that it makes sense to continue to generate power because while the cost of operating the dam will be in the long run a negative, the hydropower helps subsidize. So even it's not a break even for the complete dam maintenance and operation, but it provides some financial benefit and it covers the cost of reinvesting in the mechanical equipment. So that makes sense. If the PURPA comes up with a not a favorable ruling in terms of what our revenue potential is, we would need to redo that analysis. But for the time being, that seems like the recommendation is to continue to invest in hydropower. And the opportunity to reassess this before our next major overhaul, which we do about every 10 years. So we're probably now, maybe it's 7 years away from the next one. So before we did that, we would want to evaluate return on investment. Hydropower at Superior, will continue to generate power because we've already made the investment and we might as well realize the benefits of the equipment. But probably from a financial perspective, it will not make sense to reinvest in the long run in maintaining hydropower unless there were other goals established by the city. But from a financial perspective, it doesn't have a return on investment. Removing the dam would be a pretty transformative alternative, but very difficult to come up with the costs to cover. We would have to probably get resources from some other source because, we're talking about in the tens of millions of dollars. And again, this is operated by the general fund. So the general fund doesn't have resources to take a dam out. So we would need to, if we thought this was a valuable, something that we would want to consider, we need to really explore what types of revenue sources or financial sources we can come up with to deal with that. So at this point, we weren't recommending moving forward with that option. So I think, yep, that was my last slide. And I will stop sharing. It sounds like someone's, okay. So that was my presentation. Hopefully that was what you were looking for.
Thanks, Brian. Brian, could you, for everybody who maybe doesn't know that well, Ann Arbor actually has 4 dams, correct?
Yes, we have
Did
4. Yep.
Did you go from upstream to downstream and name all of them? And correct me if I'm wrong, I think Superior is the furthest downstream, correct?
That's
and is
correct.
It actually within the city limits?
No.
But the city of Ann Arbor owns it. Is that it somehow?
Yes.
Interesting.
So
why don't you start upstream and then go downstream? Because I think there's the 2 other dams that you haven't mentioned are, well, I'll let you mention.
Yeah, so Barton is the furthest upstream. That's the impoundment for the water supply. When we procured these, the city was interested in having ownership of the dams. I think it was in the 1960s, primarily because of the impoundment for the water supply, and it was sort of like buy one get 3 free. I would have loved to give those other 3 back, but what can you do? The next one downstream is Argo, which is at one point looked at removing Argo. It has been identified by, the state has a list of dams considered to return to their natural habitat, and that's one. There was, I think there might have been a referendum in the city and pretty strong rowing community lobby, and that wasn't going to move forward. The community wanted to keep Argo for recreational purposes. The next one is Getty's Dam, which is down and provides basically the impoundment for Gallup Park. So that also has some pretty substantial recreational benefits for the community. And then the last one is Superior, and that's down by the, what is it, St. Joe's property.
Yeah, it's past
in Superior
Washington Community
Township.
College.
It's in Superior Township, yep.
Right. Okay, so with that background, I'd like to open things up for questions, comments. We'll make this very freewheeling. So, Noah, go ahead.
Yes. First of all, thanks for the presentation. I didn't hear you speak to like flooding concerns at all. I know that's kind of controversial whether dams are actually helpful or not for managing flooding, but given potential changes with more extreme weather, is there any benefit to keeping some of these dams for that reason?
So our dams are permitted. We operate run-of-river, which means whatever comes, we have to pass. Okay. So we don't retain water, and the purpose of them. There may be some ancillary benefits associated with dealing with storm events and controlling flooding, but in general, they're just passing the water that's coming at them, and we're obligated to operate them that way. So they're not, the purpose of them is not flood control.
Gotcha. So that wouldn't really factor in as an additional reason to keep them then, I guess. One kind of like technical, maybe silly question. If I'm looking at Barton Dam and I see all the gates are opened, that's water that's not going through the turbines. Is any water going through the turbines at that point?
Typically, so how it's set up is the first water goes through the turbine.
Okay.
So the turbine takes as much water as it can, and then once it's tapped out, then the gates open. So it's all automated, and it's based on level. So when the water hits a certain, again, all the water goes through the turbine, and then as the pond level increases above a certain set point, because the turbine isn't able to handle all of the flow, the first set of gates open, and then the next set of gates open, and the next set of gates open. So they open in sequence. There's a sequence in terms of what they open also. So it's not, they don't open individually all the way. So you could see all the gates open, but that doesn't mean the dam is at capacity, because you'll have a set of gates open a little bit, and then they all open a little bit, and they all open more. So there's a program that dictates the sequencing of how the gates operate, but they are secondary to the turbine.
Okay, and one more comment sort of question. There is a dam that was taken out in Dexter, if people might be aware of, and you can kind of see the recreation the benefits that they got was they got more land because you have a narrower stream as opposed to a pond or a lake. So have we sketched out at all what that might look like at all, or is that way down the line?
We did not go to that extent.
Okay.
So, gotcha. But yes, I mean, if you did take out the dam, whichever dam it was, I mean, we were only looking at Superior, you are you're gonna get additional land between frontage for properties down there. Yes, we would anticipate that there would be not positive feedback from the landowners along that stretch, and that they would be opposed.
Others? Alex?
So I think you were saying a lot of the information that you had was from a few years ago. I'm wondering if the financials for like these investments and stuff seem any more favorable with some of the IRA provisions that were passed, like the renewable energy production tax credits and the investment tax credits, and I think the energy infrastructure reinvestment program. Like, does that make it like more favorable substantially or minimally?
I'm not really capable of answering that. I mean, I would say that there's probably some things that are favorable and some things that are less favorable. So that would be a work that we would have to renew and take a look at what options there are. There is financing opportunities for renewable energy types of things that are available now that weren't back then. So I would say that would be some things that are favorable, but there are also what we're seeing is the cost of making these investments is also greater. So that's a challenge. And you have to look at what the long-term, revenue potential is of hydropower and who's going to buy it. And that's not as favorable an outcome in terms of what the future looks like it's going to hold. So there's sort of a lot of variables out there, and I would agree it probably could be renewed, but I don't think I'd be surprised if the outcomes of what we came up with them would be substantially different.
Okay. And then I just had like one other question. Thank you. Is in 2010, there was a study on like hydropower feasibility and investments and bringing back hydropower to like the other two dams that no longer produce hydropower. And back then, like 13 years ago, Getty's seemed favorable and kind of like they would produce a lot of power in a way, more than Argo, I'm wondering if there's any more recent data on, the options for what to do with Getty's. Like, has there been investigations into like options for returning hydropower to Getty's?
There's nothing that we've done since that time. And I think that I think the outcome of the study was that there wasn't a financial, it didn't have a return on investment. So from a financial outlook, it wouldn't be an investment that the city would be able to recoup its expenses on.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Commissioner McCoy.
Yeah, this is perhaps a silly one and not an energy one, but it popped into my brain. So I'm curious if the presence of the dams have like a positive or negative influence on the flow of water when there's like spills. I feel like pretty frequently the last couple of years, there's been various sewage or chemical spills or overflows. And so I'm curious if there's any influence either direction from the dams, in moving water from that.
Yeah. That's a good question. I would say I haven't given a whole lot of thought to that, but off the top of my head, I would say it depends, which is not probably the answer that it's a vague answer. But the reason is because it sort of depends on what's spilled. So, there are benefits of having, we pull off of the bottom. So having the impoundment, and if it's a hydrocarbon or something that's floating on the surface, it's possible that things can pass over us in terms of the drinking water's perspective. So there may be some benefits there. So I think it really depends on that. The impoundments also slow down the flow in the river tremendously. So that provides us time, which was pretty advantageous when we were dealing with the chromium spill over the last summer. So, when we were looking at travel time, once it hit Barton, we might have had a week before it would get to our the intake. So depending on what the flow in the river is, obviously there's a variable there that's pretty important. But so the impoundments do provide some benefit from that perspective in terms of slowing down. But then depending upon what it is, things can settle. And if you have things settle, then they like to attach to particles in the sediment. Now you can have this sort of continual source that continually sort of leaches and feeds. So it really depends on what the properties are of the contaminants you're dealing with, that it could work favorably or not favorably. Not sure if that answered your question or not. But.
Yeah, thank you.
Councilmember Briggs.
Yeah, thanks. This is fascinating. I'm probably going to go back and watch this again because I feel like I should probably remember this a little bit more fully. But I wanted to talk just a little bit more, get little bit more insight on the Superior Dam, which sort of you're suggesting is maybe not worth reinvesting in, but it is also outside of the city limits. And so, and there's extensive costs to removing the dam if we wanted to do that. But there's also, of course, ongoing costs to maintaining it structurally in perpetuity, I guess. And removing it, which would have some environmental benefits, obviously, but would be met with some, sounds like, extensive consternation by residents nearby. I'm just curious how much this scenario has been, I'm not sure exactly what my question is here, except for that this sounds like this is a tricky situation for us at some point down further down the road, in terms of which scenario really is has the most benefit ultimately, even considering things that are not financial in nature to the city. So I'm curious how much of that scenario planning or discussions with the township, I guess maybe that's a question, how much discussions with the township have happened around this scenario, and if there's any more feedback you want to provide about that.
So when we completed the study in 2019, we shared this with the city administration, and at the time, the decision was this is good information to have. We're going to shelve it for now and not take action. And so at that, that's sort of where it sat. We didn't do a whole lot more engagement, and really what we thought is the key decision-making points are not in front of us yet. So the next big investment is the time when we need to say, all right, are we making this or are we not? And we have to look at these other values and how do we make this decision? And I would anticipate that probably would be a decision that went to the council to say, is this, do you want to invest in something that we are not going to have a return on investment for because it's meeting other goals that the community has? So we haven't reached that decision point yet. So we have the data, but so we decided in the short term, we're going to continue to do what we do because we might as well get the full life out of the investments we've already made. And that was the decision that was made at the time. And it was pretty clear that removing Superior would have been a really big step. And the administrator wasn't willing to bring that up and say, we're going to begin to explore this any more fully, just because of the financial implications were pretty huge. And probably we don't even really know the full extent. We sort of did more of a back of the envelope as opposed to really studying what the cost of dam removal is.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Commissioner Colin Garcia.
I have two questions. The first, I think I missed at the beginning of your presentation where you may have given us information about what it costs the utility to purchase hydropower, and if it's something that's of benefit to them because of it, whether it's like a lower cost for them. Like what incentivizes a utility? So what in 2036 when the contract ends, what is the concern about finding another buyer? And then my second question is with regards to the technology, the turbine technology, what would be an advantage or a disadvantage of just when the technology comes to its end of life, installing something new, a new and different technology in the dams, new energy production types of turbines.
Okay, so your first question is on the financial side. So you're pushing my memory of PURPA and how it works, but I'm going to do my best to remember. But the issue that DTE, so they're obligated to buy this from us right now. We make the power, they have to buy it. So that's part of what and that's the sort of the purpose of PURPA is that you have these small generating, utilities, and we don't have the market, we don't have the distribution network. But we're providing this valuable product So they're obligated to take it and put it into their grid and distribute it. But what they're pushing back on is what is the appropriate price for that? And what we look at is that they should, we have a certain cost of investing in making hydropower. So shouldn't the cost that we be compensated reflect our cost of operation and putting this into the grid? They are saying no, what their cost should be, the cost that they should be is if they wanted to buy this or make this power themselves, what could they get it for? And so it's sort of their opportunity cost on the market of getting this additional power. And it's a lot cheaper than what it takes to run a hydropower plant that was built in like the 1970s, right? So it's completely, the deck is stacked against us. And we've been saying like, that's not fair. We shouldn't be having to be held to that different metric. Well, that's what is in front of that's what PURPA oversees, and the public service, who oversee that, that's what's in front of them right now.
Public Service Commission, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. So I think that sort of answered your first question. In terms of, reinvesting in new technology, I'm not completely conversant in what the cutting edge technology is but I don't think it's changed a tremendous amount. You're talking about, there's probably some efficiencies in terms of there's different turbine designs. So you may be able to get like a few extra percent, but we're not talking about like transformational amounts. And the cost of gutting and putting in new is huge. So to be able to just rehabilitate what you have, again, I think that because we did look at that when we were like, what are there efficiencies that we could gain we didn't think about replacing it, but by, replacing components with things that have less friction and things like that. And the percent increases were minimal, like it was in the couple single digits. So, again, when we looked at this and we were doing our last overhaul, it didn't have a return on investment. So we didn't pursue it. But, with hydropower, you're limited, like your power production is based on the elevation drop, which is pretty much fixed, right? Your flow, and then the efficiencies of the mechanical equipment. So you can only get so much out of each of those components. The other thing I'll just share, I guess, because of that question is what we're seeing too with, climate change, if that's what we want to call it. But, in the summertime, we're seeing flows in the river seasonally now that are a lot lower. So we have significant amounts of times where we're really almost not able to generate any power because the river flows are so low. So, it's not like you can get maximum production 12 months a year or even 9 months a year. So when we're making those investments, you're trying to maximize your return on investment in like these short windows of time when we have sufficient flow in the Huron in order to make all the power that we need to make.
It seems to me like there are, I apologize for my video. It seems to me like there are opportunities at maybe like the federal level to increase research for hydropower, and maybe, retrofitting new technology in existing like spaces that are higher efficiency that can accommodate a broader variety of flow levels. So just a thought of mine. But thank you so much for answering these questions.
Brian, I'm going to throw out some questions, some maybe intended more for stimulating thinking down the line than necessarily for a response right now. First of all, I'd like to weigh in as a somewhat informed layperson as far as replacing the technology and upgrading the turbines. My understanding is the same as Brian's. It's not like the hydropower generation is like an internal combustion engine, which has an inherently low, essentially energy conversion efficiency, and you can, make huge steps. Turbines and motors inherently have very, very high efficiencies, like 80–90%. So it's not like you're going from 20 to 30 and 30 to 60, and you're getting doubling of efficiencies by going to a new technology. You're getting, as Brian said, a few percentage points here and there. So I don't know that that's a huge opportunity, unfortunately. One of the questions that so I'm going to rattle off a couple of them, maybe hopefully there's quick answers. You talked about the contract with DTE goes to 2036. As far as I understand, dams are also relicensed by, I guess, I don't know, some federal agency. Do you know if the relicensing is tied to the contract with DTE, if there is a different set of deadlines that are either before or after that?
So we are license exempt. So we don't have a license, and that was done intentionally at the time when we were commissioning the hydro, because they were trying to incentivize hydro production at the time. So we didn't have to go through all the hurdles associated with a licensed hydropower.
Okay.
So we're compliant with all of the rules that all hydropower needs to do, but we are license exempt, and so we don't need a relicense.
Okay. So these questions are not necessarily in any logical order. We're going to be updating the comprehensive plan, and I'm just going to throw a hint out there, maybe also to our council members, that maybe the dams and what we do with the dams and what that might mean in terms of free flowing and not free flowing, and what that means in terms of land use and things like that. Maybe that should be a small element of the comprehensive plan. I'm just going to throw that out there as an idea. Obviously, if some of the dams are decommissioned, like Argo or Superior or whatever, then that might, although Superior wouldn't be in the Ann Arbor city limits, but that's just throwing that idea out there. I'm wondering if Ann Arbor were to have a municipal electric utility, whether it's an SEU or some other form, if there's any value that the SEU might see in generating hydropower. I mean, this is probably a long way down the road, but it may be something to think about. I mean, it is a very resilient kind of source. I mean, if you have a power outage or something like that, it could, that could supply a resilience center or something like that. I mean, that's not the only alternative to doing that with other storage methods coming online, but it might be of something that's of interest to a municipal utility. So that's more a statement than a question. The other question that I had is, Allen Creek is basically in a pipe. And I'm wondering if hydropower could be generated by water flowing through Allen Creek. It may not be a whole lot, but it's already contained, and maybe there's an opportunity there. I sort of doubt we want to do anything to the other creek sheds, because otherwise there's probably negative ecological impacts, but we already have that with Allen Creek. I'm wondering if anybody's ever had that idea before and whether it's been looked into.
We haven't specifically looked at Allen Creek, but we have looked at in pipe hydro, and that is something where area that is a little newer. So there may be opportunities there. The challenge with, when you're looking at something like that is, who's going to get the power? So are we going to be just putting it into the grid, which has challenges in terms of, again, we're not getting a favorable rate.
Yeah.
So it's, when we've looked at things like that in the past, it's, can we utilize the power at a city facility where we can offset our power costs, which is a lot more lucrative than paying DTE like a third of what we would be paying for it if we had to buy it from them.
Exactly.
So, and when you look at something like Allen Creek, where you have lots of flow for a very, very short period of time, and then it drops, is that conducive or not? So it could be explored. We have not explored it in detail.
Yeah.
But it's something that we could be looked at.
Right. Yeah, my son did some very small hydro projects when on farms in Australia, actually, and so it's done. It can be done very small scale. Again, that might be something that's of interest to the SEU, although because the intermittency, maybe it's not of that much value. And then the last idea that I had, which is probably not realistic given the run of the river operating conditions that we have, is, essentially with pumped hydro, you have, a bank where you could, behind the dam, where you could let the dam essentially, let's say, fill up at night an extra foot or something like that, and then generate at a higher rate during the daytime when there's higher energy demand. And that energy service might have a better return than just a constant flow. So, I mean, that's a little bit off the wall, but maybe it's something to look into at some point, especially if we're going to be retaining those.
Yeah, we're not able to do that under our current permit operating conditions, but I have not really explored, is this something that could be entertained or not? It would be a question we need to ask. And what my guess is that would put, when we were licensed exempt, it's probably going to open up a lot of environmental impact things and things that we'd have to study associated with that. So, yeah. But it's not a deal breaker. It's something possibly that could be looked at, but I have not looked into it.
Okay. Good. Those were my questions. Does anybody have any additional ideas? Councilmember Briggs.
My dog apparently does, with the cat. But I just wanted to respond quickly to the concept of the comment around the comprehensive plan. Well, I think it's sort of interesting. There's a lot of things that I think we want to do with our comprehensive planning process. We tend to not be, at least I don't believe the scope of it this time around is to be very site specific. And so it's unlikely to go into the details actually in any part of our community around how we might use or reuse and reimagine certain spaces. But sort of, I think addressing sort of bigger issues that may more impact our ordinances and how we update sort of our land use plan that way. But there may be opportunities during that process, certainly to provide feedback to it and get the discussion started in other ways.
Great. Any others? Brian, thanks again so much. That was very informative. I think as usual, when you dig in deeper, things get more and more complicated. So it's good to be exposed to those levels of complication that we probably didn't necessarily think about before. So I think with that, you're welcome to leave the meeting. Our next point is maybe something of interest. So next on the agenda is a discussion of the Ninth Circuit Court's decision relative to Berkeley, California's ban on natural gas. And what I thought I might do is provide a little bit of background for commissioners who maybe haven't been following all the details, as well as maybe listeners who are not aware of the situation. So first of all, I'll start with the local situation. As of now, 3 commissions, the Environmental, Energy, and Renters Commission, all passed resolutions. You're familiar with that resolution because we passed it. And that's all within the last month, dealing with natural gas connections for new construction. I think everybody's familiar with those 2 resolve clauses. In the case of the Environmental Commission, they actually split those up and they voted on them separately with 2 different vote totals. One was 10-4 for the first resolution, and the other was 14-0 on the second. So the first resolution, resolve clause, I should say, related to asking the city administrator to work with city planning to draft and pass an ordinance banning natural gas connections with extremely limited connections for all new construction. And then the second resolve clause asked the city administrator and the Standing Planning Commission to draft and pass a number of or to look at a number of measures that the city could basically implement that would incentivize all electric construction, as well as we added some additional qualifiers in there, making it also sustainable, healthy, reliable, and affordable. And the situation in Berkeley is Berkeley passed a ban, and we're going to hear from Noah in a second more about that. The repeal is certainly relevant to the first resolve clause of the resolution that we passed. Just some additional background information. It's noteworthy that there are 104 jurisdictions in the United States that have passed zero emission building ordinances. So this is not just a handful or 10 or 20 or 30. There are 100 of these. Those are tracked by an entity called the Building Decarbon Coalition. And they have a website, and it includes information on each of the ordinances by project type, occupancy, and scope. In light of all of this, 2 weeks ago, some of you may have seen this covered in MLive. First of all, I was going to talk about the city council's action, but before that, actually, even after the Berkeley decision by the Court of Appeals, New York State agreed to a budget deal, which also includes a ban on new natural gas connections. And a state of New York spokesperson stated that the ban will not include any provisions for municipalities to opt out of the requirement. So that's interesting that in spite of a federal court coming to a ruling, the state of California is planning on going ahead with its own ban. And then in light of everything that has happened, last Monday, City Council unanimously approved, when I say last Monday, that's not yesterday, that's a week ago, unanimously approved a resolution calling on the city attorney to provide as soon as possible a public legal opinion regarding the Ninth Circuit's decision in the case in Berkeley, which is called the California Restaurant Association versus the City of Berkeley. And the resolution includes several whereas clauses that I think are relevant. First of all, it says, whereas advisory commissions to City Council, such as the Energy Commission, Renters Commission, and the Environmental Commission, have passed or are considering resolutions requesting Council to investigate achieving A20 goals through a zoning ordinance that imposes restriction on fossil gas connections in new developments or major remodels. Another whereas clause states, whereas City Council approved resolution R23-101 directing the city administrator to negotiate a new or amended gas franchise that to the fullest extent possible is aligned with the city's A20 goals. And then the third, I think, important whereas clause is, whereas City Council is currently prioritizing negotiations of the city's gas franchise in order to reduce fossil gas consumption and achieve the A20 goals. It then says, where's the resolve clause? Yeah, basically the resolve clause is what I mentioned, that the city attorney is to provide as soon as possible a legal opinion regarding the decision. So with all of that, I think it's fortunate that we have, as a fellow energy commissioner, Noah Levine, who is an attorney. And before City Council passed their resolution last week, Wayne Appleyard, former chair of the Energy Commission, suggested that I reach out to Noah and ask him if he'd be willing to take a look at the situation in Berkeley and present that to the Energy Commission. And we received that, or I received that from Noah, and then somewhat belatedly, but I reached out then to Joe to include it on today's agenda. So I'm hoping that Noah's analysis helps inform not only us, but also potentially the city attorney's evaluation. And so I'm going to turn it over to Noah. And I think Noah has a couple of slides that he's going to present and then make some comments, and then we'll open it up for discussion.
Okay, thanks for that helpful introduction, John. I will attempt to share my screen here. tires. Okay. Are you seeing the PowerPoint presentation?
Yep.
Okay, cool.
Can you go
make
on the
it bigger.
slideshow? There we are. Great. Yep.
I think I can
Yeah, you're good now.
even bigger, maybe. Okay, I don't know if that's bigger, but anyway. Okay, cool. And yeah, thanks again, John, for that introduction. I will say that this is a bit of a quick study that I did on this, but I do think it is instructive. But the document that was first posted on Legistar, it might have a few typos, but in any case, I do also have to point out before I get started a quick legal disclaimer that applies to the presentation. It also applies to the document. If you had originally looked at the document, it wasn't on there, but I did have a legal disclaimer very similar to this one added to the document that is also on Legistar. I believe this PowerPoint should be available on Legistar, but it was created very late, so some of you may not have seen it, which is totally fine because I will be going through it. But just the disclaimer is that the information contained in this presentation is provided for informational purposes only and should not be construed as legal advice on any subject matter. I don't represent the city of Ann Arbor, and I don't represent the Energy Commission. These are my own opinions. All right, so try to go through this as quickly as we can, but little case history. 2019, the city of Berkeley passed their natural gas ban. It was called Prohibition of Natural Gas Infrastructure in New Buildings, Berkeley Municipal Code Chapter 12.8. A little sort of footnote, although it is, I guess, more than a footnote, is that in California, they have a state building code, which cities can enact as is, or they can make amendments to it. Essentially, the state building code is a floor, and cities and other bodies have the ability to enact stricter standards. There is somewhat of a process. I believe that the state has to approve it. Now, I just want to be clear that Berkeley did not go through that. I believe their building code is in chapter 10. Don't quote me on that, but this is a separate ordinance that they passed, essentially using their police powers, so-called police powers, which gives cities and states the ability to pass laws for the general safety and welfare of their citizens. So with that, they passed this ordinance that said natural gas infrastructure shall be prohibited in newly constructed buildings. I believe there was a couple of minor exceptions, which I won't get into here, but the key is the definition of what is natural gas infrastructure. So what actually are they prohibiting? So they define natural gas infrastructure as fuel gas piping other than service pipe in or connection with a building, structure, or within the property lines of premises. Key part, extending from the point of delivery at the gas meter as specified in the California Mechanical and Plumbing Code. Now, here's a little visual that hopefully will explain this a little better. So yellow, that's the service line coming in from the utility to the meter. That's not being regulated. The red, after the meter, then you have the pipes that lead up to your individual appliances. This kind of looks like a house, but it doesn't just apply to homes, it's businesses. So essentially, the Berkeley ordinance prohibits the red piping from the meter to the various gas appliances. You know, here we have typical ones that you might have, like water heater, furnace, and a stove. So shortly after it was passed, California Restaurant Association, on behalf of their members, filed suit in federal district court. They obviously are most concerned with the ability of their restaurants to have natural gas stoves. And to be clear, no one's saying that you can't have natural gas stoves in existing structures. These are newly created, newly built commercial structures that they would be prohibiting it from. And so California Restaurant Association argued that the Federal Energy Policy and Conservation Act, abbreviated EPCA, preempted the ordinance. A quick explanation of preemption: it's a legal doctrine that allows a higher level of government to limit or even eliminate the power of a lower level of government to regulate a particular subject. This can be done language in the statute, but then any
Noah, you're
statute
breaking
without
up at
that,
least.
excuse me, express written. This is okay.
Noah, you're
Sorry,
breaking-
I'll try to get a little
breaking up a
closer.
little
I
bit.
know you. Okay, let me try something. That's weird. Sorry about that. I did notice a couple of you were breaking up on me when you were talking. I will maybe stop my video. I don't know if that'll help, but. Okay, so let's go back. So I'll go back over that last point. Is that better at all, John?
Sounds better, yes.
Okay, hopefully it'll stick. I know like a couple of people glitched, and I guess maybe that was on my end, but in any case, hopefully it won't happen.
Everything was fine up until this definition of preemption.
Okay, gotcha. So preemption is a legal doctrine that allows a higher level of government to limit lower levels of government or even eliminate the power of a lower level of government to regulate a particular subject area. This can either be explicitly stated in the statute, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. It can be implied by the overall structure of the statute. Real quick, I mean, this probably is obvious to most of you, but at the top of our system, we have federal laws. Quick side note that in addition, federal agency regulations can also trump state laws. So, but basically you have federal states can also trump things that cities want to do by preempting them. Okay, so EPCA originally passed in 1975. It was a response to the 1973 oil crisis. It has been amended a number of times since then, but originally it was certainly that was the purpose of it, was to respond to that. And they gave it the full title, an act to increase domestic energy supplies and availability, to restrain energy demand, to prepare for energy emergencies and other purposes. And the part that is really most relevant here is that EPCA directs, sorry, I had to move something. EPCA directs the Department of Energy to set energy efficiency standards for appliances. And it does, here's the express preemption language: no state regulation concerning energy efficiency, energy use, or water use of such a covered product shall be effective with respect to that product. Now, at the district court level, the court looked at this statute and they took kind of a narrow interpretation of it, and they actually upheld it in favor of Berkeley. So they won at the trial court. And the reason that the trial court or the district court in our federal system is what they're referred to, the reason they did this is for two main reasons. One is they were giving deference to an area of law, historically the province of state and local regulation. So historically, states and cities have been considered to have the main power in our federal system to regulate for the safety and well-being of citizens. Now, certainly over time, as the federal government has gotten bigger, they've certainly intruded upon this. But the courts still do give some deference to making sure that this historic area isn't totally trampled upon. And so basically they're looking for something that's pretty clearly stated. Another sort of technical thing that's getting a bit in the weeds is they relied on a legal precedent that there's a presumption against preemption. Again, the idea being that we want to be really clear if we're going to not allow a state or a local government to do something because of preemption. And again, any finding of preemption needs to be clearly stated in the statute. So with that background, the district court looked at the ordinance and said it doesn't facially regulate or mandate any particular type of product, or if the ordinance does not facially regulate or mandate any particular type of product or appliance, then it's not preempted by EPCA. And in other words, EPCA only prevents the direct regulation of appliances, does not prohibit local laws that might indirectly affect the use of regulated appliances. So as we know, this case was appealed to the Ninth Circuit, and they definitely saw things differently. They looked at EPCA and they said EPCA preemption is broader and that it extends to regulations that address the products themselves and the on-site infrastructure for their use of natural gas. The appeals court decision hinged in large part of its understanding of the term energy use. They said energy use is based on consumption that happens at the point of use, and that this means we measure energy products not from where the products roll off the factory floor, but from where consumers use the products. And so essentially, by preventing natural gas appliances from being connected to the infrastructure, that's essentially regulating their energy use to a level of zero. And the Persian language says you're not supposed to be regulating the energy use of these products. I would also point out that while the court didn't make a big deal about it, they said that because of this express language, they said that negates the presumption against preemption. And so just to be clear, the presumption is sort of like a thumb on the scale in one direction, or like a presumption of innocence in criminal cases. It's something, it makes it like an extra sort of burden that you have to overcome. And when they saw the express language, they relied on precedent, which they said meant that there was no longer to be that presumption. They also saw that there was an explicit exception in the preemption section of EPCA, and they said that was further confirmation that EPCA preemption extends to building codes because it provides this exception for a building code that meets 7 very specific requirements, which, if you want to take a look at those, they're footnoted in the document on Legistar. But in essence, it says the code must allow for an option for a builder to meet the code requirements using natural gas products. And so they could require in return other offsets. If that's the choice that a builder would go to, then they would also have to do something else, like better insulation, more energy, if extra maybe efficient appliances, possibly solar power. It'd be up to the municipality to come up with something. I would also point out the Ninth Circuit also rejected similar arguments from the Department of Energy itself, who filed an amicus brief. Quick explanation, amicus briefs can be filed by pretty much anyone for appeals cases or Supreme Court cases. And I also show in the next 2 bullets that there were several states and the city of New York, as well as environmental nonprofits, that also were on the side of Berkeley. Just to give you the lay of the land here, on the other side, you had some big industry groups that were going against Berkeley and also submitted briefs. Not surprisingly, American Gas Association, National Association of Home Builders, and National Association of Manufacturers. But the court really only spoke to the ones made by DOE. Technically, it was U.S. attorneys on behalf of DOE. And courts will give this a little more credence than others that want to submit amicus briefs. But and so basically the argument was pretty similar by U.S. attorneys, which said that state and local regulations that impose energy conservation standards or similar performance standards for the efficiency or energy consumption. Sorry, let me start that words. EPCA only prohibits state and local regulations that impose energy conservation standards or similar performance standards for the efficiency or energy consumption of certain appliances. And as we know, the court also rejected this. Again, they said preemption's not that narrow, and looking at the plain meaning, the plain language of the statute, that EPCA requires a broader interpretation. And they also added that the ability to use covered products is meaningless if consumers can't access the natural gas available to them within the city of Berkeley. One other thing I want to point out quickly, there was a concurring opinion. The decision was unanimous, but there was a couple of judges that wanted to also add a concurring opinion, which basically they agree with the overall decision, but they wanted to add something else they wanted to say, basically. It's, you know, it's not binding, but it is interesting sometimes. And in this case, the concurring opinion, in the Judge O'Scanlan seemed troubled by the assumption in the majority opinion. Again, the majority opinion assumed that the presumption against preemption would be negated by that express preemption language in EPCA. And he goes on to reference the fact that, according to him, he thinks at the Supreme Court level, there's conflicting lines of cases that it's not really clear to him that whether there should be a presumption of preemption here or not. But he ultimately determines that, at least looking at the precedent in the Ninth Circuit, that he is bound to hold that presumption against preemption does not apply to the express preemption provision before us today. So again, this is kind of reading between the lines, but you could infer that without this presumption, he may have dissented from the majority opinion, and this is something maybe that other judges would see differently in another circuit, which gets us to the current case status. As according to my knowledge, Berkeley hasn't fully decided whether to appeal the case. They don't have to. They could appeal. They could do what's known as an en banc appeal, where the entire Ninth Circuit, instead of 3 randomly selected judges, which is normally what you have, the entire Ninth Circuit would rehear the appeal, or they could appeal to the Supreme Court. In our federal system, you're guaranteed one appeal. So neither of these appeals are guaranteed. The courts could decline to even hear the appeal, essentially. One interesting thing I'm kind of curious if they're going to do is just kind of pass a new law that is structured differently, possibly doing what other cities in California have done that Berkeley chose not to do, which would be amending their building code. So I'm very curious to see if that's what they'll do. But at this point, we don't know. Okay, so getting back to how this might impact Ann Arbor. Strictly speaking, the Ninth Circuit's decision does not have binding effect in Ann Arbor. So if you look at this little map here, you can see the area that the Ninth Circuit has jurisdiction over on the west side of our country, and some other little territories there. Clearly not Michigan. Michigan is in the Sixth Circuit, what's known as the Eastern District of Michigan. Now, any other lawyer, any other judge will have to take a look at this case. It'll have to be reckoned with, because at this point, it's the highest court out there making a determination. But there, you know, this is what we refer to as persuasive precedent in legal parlance. And again, Sixth Circuit, or any other circuit for that matter, outside of the Ninth Circuit, they are allowed to make their own legal determination. If they come up with something different, it's possible that could be a reason why the Supreme Court might get involved. But any case, another thing to point out is the decision, these decisions are very fact specific. So just because a ban like Berkeley's is struck down, if another ban comes along that doesn't look like Berkeley's, that doesn't necessarily mean that this decision will apply to that ban. A good attorney will try to, if it comes to it, will try to distinguish a different ban and say why it's different than Berkeley's and why the Ninth Circuit decision really isn't even relevant. And again, just to remind you, it's the red areas that Berkeley was banning. So you probably couldn't ban the appliances either, but maybe you could come up with something more creative, something different than what Berkeley did. So just to go through a couple potential options that we might still be able to do, even if, even with this Ninth Circuit decision out there weighing on us, again, it's not binding on the Sixth Circuit. So we could potentially pass like Berkeley's. Ann Arbor has the same sort of ability to pass benefits for public health and safety. Again, we would have to reckon with the Ninth Circuit decision. And there is another little wrinkle. In Michigan, we might have to deal with state preemption by the Michigan Building Code. The Michigan Building Code does not have an express preemption clause, but to my knowledge, it's never been challenged and no city has ever attempted to really pass something that would run counter to the building code. That they're possible that that has happened, but not to my knowledge. So with these two arguments, that does probably give this option a bigger risk at being struck down, just because there's these two hurdles that we have to overcome. It's not to say that we couldn't do it, but that's just two things we'd have to consider. And I know, as John has mentioned, and as most of us are aware, one thing that we've come closest to doing is using Ann Arbor's zoning authority to ban natural gas use. This, of course, is different than Berkeley's ordinance, which used the city's inherent police powers. Now, again, I can't find, or I'm not aware of a case that did something like this, and it's a bit unclear how a court would interpret a zoning regulation with respect to EPCA. Certainly an argument can be made that a zoning regulation banning natural gas use would also be preempted, because it kind of does a similar thing to what Berkeley was doing. But again, it all depends what zoning regulation we come up with. On the other hand, Berkeley has specifically banned the natural gas piping, which seems pretty directly tied to the appliance. A zoning regulation potentially could be structured in a way that would seem further removed from a regulation on the gas appliances themselves. And while EPCA does mention building code regulations, it doesn't specifically say anything, to my knowledge, about zoning regulations. So that being said, the exception to preemption in EPCA might be another way to go. It might not get us exactly what we want. And possibly we could do this, as a general ordinance, as I already kind of explained through our city's police powers. That's one way to do it. Another thing would be a zoning regulation that complies with the building code exception spelled out. It does specifically say building codes and not zoning, but again, this is just an idea. And since zoning regulations are usually something that come into play in approval for new projects. Maybe this is something we could do. Again, it's a bit of a spitballing brainstorm and would certainly require further research, but that is certainly something that could be looked into. Again, it's not going to be a total ban on natural gas connections because to meet the exception, it can't be. It has to be some sort of regulation that could favor all electric developments, but still leaving open some way to comply with the regulation to still allow natural gas. We could hopefully come up with something creative here, some sort of offsets that would give us some benefits even if natural gas is installed. And hopefully maybe we could even structure something that maybe not right away, but maybe over time developers see, okay, this is actually easier to just do it all electric and maybe it's cheaper. So that is another possibility. Lastly, we get to natural gas distribution franchising. This is something that admittedly I've looked at the least, but it was pointed out, and I got this idea from the Ninth Circuit's opinion itself. So I will say, let's see. So it was in response to another argument in defense of the ordinance. So Berkeley, this is the court's language, Berkeley finally contends that preemption here would mean that the city must affirmatively make natural gas available everywhere. In rejecting this argument, the court stated that our holding doesn't touch on whether the city has any obligation to maintain or expand the availability of a utility's delivery of gas to meters. In one of the other concurring opinions by Judge Baker, he also wrote that, nor is there any indication from its text or structure that EPCA speaks to the distribution of natural gas. If a state or local government terminates existing gas utility service or declines to extend such service, EPCA likely has no application. Again, this is going to require further research, but there may be something here that we can do, especially since our natural gas franchise is being negotiated for renewal. All right, last slide. So some final thoughts and recent development, which I can go through quickly because John did point this out as well. So any natural gas ban, in my opinion, is going to face opposition, probably in the form of a lawsuit. There's just way too powerful interests with too strong of a financial incentive to try and stop such bans. But I mean, I don't think, I don't see that as a reason necessarily to not do it. The Ninth Circuit's decision also is not the last word on natural gas bans and EPCA preemption as well. There's certainly going to be more court cases, more challenges. This could end up at the Supreme Court, depending on what other circuits do. And so we could wait around. We could maybe get greater certainty but I mean, it could be years before we have that kind of certainty. And I don't really think, we've declared a climate emergency. So clearly, the time is of the essence. We can't really afford to wait years to do nothing. Now, as John already mentioned, I believe it was the May 1st Ann Arbor City Council meeting that resolution asking the city attorney to provide an analysis of the Ninth Circuit opinion in relation to Ann Arbor. And I certainly applaud City Council for doing this. What I've seen over the years is that I don't see as much collaboration as I would like to see with the city attorney's office. And this is, I think, is one example where a more collaborative approach with the city attorney's office would be warranted. I mean, this of course assumes that city council is supportive of limiting future natural gas hookups in some way. So I would really recommend that going forward, we get the city attorney's office and Office of Sustainability working together to come up with a resolution that they both think will give us the best chance to succeed. Now, we do have to be careful with giving city attorneys advice out. We have to keep it confidential. But the attorney-client privilege, I do not think would be broken, as they say, by including Missy Stoltz or John Mursky. I've seen this in corporate settings, not personally, but observed it. A lot of corporations have attorneys that work hand in hand with business people from the beginning of a project to the end to help, answer potential legal questions that come up and vet things. And so I really think that type of approach, rather just coming up with something and then sending it to the city's attorney's office, waiting 2 months, and then they come back and say, sorry, you can't do that. I would rather have them in from the beginning. And as I said, a more collaborative approach, I think, would be the best way to go. I will stop sharing my screen and try to do video again here.
Thank you, Noah. I'd like to open things up for discussion, questions. Commissioner McKenna.
Thank you so much. No, that was so informative. Thank you for sharing all of that. One thing I didn't hear you mention was state law preemption. Where are you? So I can speak to you. Yeah. Because I believe that the state law and the state building code, right, like regulates the use of both energy efficiency and also the kind of supply of utility services. So wondering your take on that. And then I also wanted to share that, yeah, I totally agree with you in terms of working with the city attorney's office, and it just based on what you outlined for us, of course, you're a lawyer, but it makes me feel like it's really the structuring, kind of the language of what gets ultimately, considered for passing within the city government is all about that language, and that's kind of like what's going to make or break it. So thanks for sharing all that.
Yes, thanks. I did mention it quickly, but it's possible you missed it, and I didn't give a full analysis of it. In full disclosure, there was some discussions between me and John earlier about looking at state preemption, specifically when we were considering the zoning regulation. I believe it was a home builders association wrote a letter basically arguing why we were preempted from doing it. And I did take a look at that. And certainly you're right. That is something that we're going to have to contend with. A zoning regulation might be a way to possibly avoid preemption. And I will say that from a commenter that comes to our meetings, he has gotten in touch with the original people one of the original drafters of the building code, who, according to him, that was not their intent to preempt local cities from doing their own thing. Now, quite frankly, I haven't looked at the legislative history to tell you what it says, but the assumption, I think, has been that it does preempt. But again, I don't think anyone has really ever challenged whether or not the building code does preempt it. There certainly isn't very express language doing so. I do think there is some language that says that, yes, cities can't essentially make their own building codes. So we would, but that's not what Berkeley did either. Like I said, they could have done it through their building code, but they didn't. So again, it's something that is going to be a dual threat, is state preemption and federal preemption.
Commissioner Beck.
I think my connection is strange since I'm in my office, but what about using a tax structure? Really appreciate it.
Yeah. I mean, you're saying like, what are we taxing, I guess?
$100 a nanoliter of natural gas.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I really don't know. I'd have to look into what the taxing authority that the city has is. It might be possible.
As far as I know,
really
it's
don't know,
very,
though, so.
very restrictive in Michigan. But
Yeah.
it's, again, something to look at. I think it's not, a bad idea. Councilmember Briggs.
Yeah, just wanted to say thank you to Noah for putting together this presentation and going into it. It's really helpful to go through the facts of the case and understand how it is, similar and different from what we've been contemplating. But certainly, as you're right, this is certainly guidance that everybody's looking at right now, which is to the point that council was very aware that this is a point of interest to multiple commissions in the city, that commissions have, as you saw in the whereas clauses of that resolution. It's very unusual for the city attorney's office to provide a public opinion on an issue. We have confidential information for a reason. But because there is so much interest in this, both amongst our advisory commissions and amongst the community at large, we wanted to make sure that we provided some guidance from some thoughts from our city attorney's office on this matter. So that will be something I'm sure that folks will be interested to see what's coming out, but recognizing that there will be things that our city attorney's office will not be saying because they need to be kept confidential as well, because that's guidance that's provided. But I do want to just say a little bit about how the city attorney's office works in the city, which is obviously it advises council, and it also advises the organization as a whole. So there is that collaboration that is happening between staff and the city attorney's office quite frequently in terms of those conversations, the free flow of ideas, and we also have we've brought in specialized staff as well for certain OSI related issues that we're able to work with as well. But so, Dr. Stoltz, for example, when it would be something of this nature, would be a part of those internal confidential briefings as well. So in terms of how far out that information can go, that's obviously they serve a certain purpose in the organization. So we have to be careful about that. But I'm happy to provide more information, or I'm sure Travis will be happy to speak to, kind of how the role or the functioning of the attorney's organization.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that collaboration exists. And something else I was going to say that slipped out of my mind, but anyway.
But
I might chime in here and say that I hadn't seen Noah's slides before he presented them tonight, and the suggestion that I be involved is maybe something that Noah thought maybe came up in email exchanges or conversations, but it wasn't something that I specifically recommended or asked for. And I can imagine it would be unlikely that someone like me would be involved just because I'm chair, and I won't be chair anyhow after this meeting. And there's probably people in the city's orbit, I'll call it that way, that are better qualified to interact with the city attorney and with staff than I am. But I think that's maybe the general thrust is to bring in multiple inputs, maybe even from the University of Michigan. There may be legal experts there that would be willing to provide either pro bono or a fee service on consulting on this matter. I think that's maybe the broader point.
Yeah, that's correct. And you're Erica, you're right. You do have to be careful about how big a sphere that you expand that to, and it is a little bit unclear, but certainly it is greater. The client, as defined in the client attorney privilege, is greater than just city council. It does certainly extend to senior staff members. Arguably, it could extend to city commissioners too, but we don't have City of Ann Arbor emails, which does complicate things.
Yeah. And you're right. I mean, it's so definitely senior staff are included in the relevant conversations on certain topic areas, because it's critical that they also have that guidance and advice as well. I guess I would just like to speak that to the point that we're definitely as needed on different issues. You will see for different issues that the city is facing, whether it's Gelman or different OSI. We bring in we will contract professional services with specialists in certain legal areas when we need that for certain different types of cases that we may not have that inside expertise on. So that's something that the city has a history of doing, and certainly will continue doing. We'll continue doing moving forward, and we certainly do within OSI issues as well. So it's important. This is a highly functioning professional organization. And so we'd look at each of these issues, recognizing that just like in Berkeley, there's a lot of different entities that are paying attention to these issues, and we need to make sure that we are operating in a way that is fulfilling the policy goals and the values of our community, and also being responsible stewards of our tax dollars.
Councilmember Radina.
Thanks. And I'll just briefly follow up a little bit on the, mostly because I know that this is not unique to this body. And some of the other commissions that I work with, I know that there are a lot of times where commissioners in particular would like to have kind of more access to legal staff and legal advice and those types of things. And I want to acknowledge, and this is not specific, obviously, to John or to any of the other chairs that we would work with, but in any of these circumstances, a lot of the times that we have this privilege, as I know so many of you know, is because we're talking about potential litigation that the city might be engaged in. And the more people who have access to that information, the more chance there is that one person could break that trust. And if that happens, we're suddenly broadcasting our potential, legal case, our legal position out to those who might sue us, or those who are watching a commission meeting, or and so keeping that sphere really, really close, particularly on things like this, where we are working with an issue that's working its way through the courts, and we're paying attention, and we're learning, and we're also developing our own legal strategies to move forward. It's really important to keep that circle pretty close.
Other comments or questions? I'm going to weigh in with a few thoughts of my own. First of all, I want to go out a little bit so that we look at the resolution that we passed, at least with both resolve clauses, and look at this issue a little bit more holistically. So what we've been dealing with specifically is the first resolve clause related to a ban, or what we also indicated would be one with potentially limited exceptions. And I think maybe that's something that also be considered when crafting something, if we were to take that route, and hopefully the city's attorney would consider that. So maybe there are ways of, and apparently Berkeley may have done this as well, but that's something obviously to look at is how limiting it is versus if it's a little bit looser, then maybe it provides the latitude that allows us to pass legal review at whatever level is finally going to make a decision. Just wanted to throw that idea out. Secondly, what I wanted to mention is, well, I actually have a question. There's this idea of home rule, And Noah, what does that mean in a case like this? And does it apply to the city? And what rights does it give to the city, or in a case like this, is that at all applicable?
I have heard people throw this around, that we're what's known as a home rule state, and
Yeah.
I believe that mostly applies to regional or to local zoning laws, that we have the ability to do that. It's not regionally done. I suppose I apologize. I'm not sure if it applies to other things so much, but I would say that at least I think oftentimes that can apply to building codes too. But if that was the case, I think that's negated by the state building code for the most part. So maybe, yes, there still is this background principle of home rule, but there's been other stuff that's layered on top of that over the years that really has stripped a lot of that home rule away. And I think mostly what exists now is our zoning authority to make zoning decisions that aren't done regionally. But again, I'm a little bit uncertain about that.
Okay, well, maybe it's something again that the city's attorneys, the city attorney's office would look at in terms of its applicability in this case. What I wanted to do is focus at least a little bit on the second resolve clause, and contrast it to the resolution passed by council last Monday. So the second resolve clause is something that I would encourage council to consider. It's not even mentioned in the resolution that it passed on the Berkeley case, but I'd like to pass on that I sent a list of 7 different possible ways. We talked about measures that could incentivize all electric construction. I sent her and encouraged her to share them with anyone she wanted, including other planning commissioners, as well as Brett Leonard. They ranged from everything from a moratorium, and cities often declare moratoriums when they're trying to settle something out. So that might be a strategy that the city could take. There are jurisdictions in Washtenaw County that have passed moratoriums and even extended those. And that might be something to look at. There was the idea that Commissioner Peck brought up about taxes. Another way of looking at is fees. We charge a number of different fees. Maybe there's a way of doing that. So like I said, there's 7 or 8 different things that I think, and just even looking at those might set off a brainstorming session with people within city staff that might come up with other ideas. So I really want to emphasize that we shouldn't neglect that. And the other thing, and then I'll recognize you, Councilmember Briggs, is I'm personally very concerned with the idea that the franchise is going to solve our problems. So first of all, the franchise runs through 2027. That doesn't mean that the franchise agreement couldn't be reached before that, and that would preempt potentially the existing franchise. But remember, the franchise only governs how gas is going to be delivered and how there might be a transition. And I think, first of all, we have to recognize, at least I'll speak for myself, I'm not certain that DTE is going to be particularly interested in advancing Ann Arbor's interests. That means it might drag its feet in the negotiations. It may not be a good faith actor in how it deals with the city. So it probably does not benefit from reaching any kind of new franchise agreement that meets the conditions of A20. I mean, DTE came out in writing and said that they are opposed to the natural gas provisions in the A20 plan. So it's pretty clear that they are not interested in accommodating Ann Arbor's interest. The other thing is that even if we had a fantastic new franchise agreement, that doesn't, the whole time between now and when that is signed, as we've seen with essentially one approval per month of new natural gas construction, those potentially are going to continue to be approved, certainly by right construction. I mean, the city cannot do anything with by right. And once those are installed, or once those are built, those natural gas supplied assets are going to continue to burn natural gas for many, many years. And the kinds of things that are solutions for getting away from natural gas, like geothermal or wastewater geothermal, or moving to biogas, or using hydrogen or a mix of hydrogen, these kinds of things are not going to be introduced at the flip of a switch. So even if we have a wonderful new franchise agreement, it's very unlikely that we're going to be significantly reducing the flow of natural gas for many, many years. And so I'm really concerned with the one whereas clause in the resolution that is passed by council. And then also Shannon Gibrando, Planning Commission Chair, shared an email exchange that she had with Brett Leonard, where Brett said to her, let's see if I have it here in front of me. He wrote, Shannon wrote this way. I got an email from John Mursky about timing for natural gas ban. Any news from me on that front? I am enthusiastic to work on the carrots and sticks approach that I brought up a few weeks ago if the ban seems infeasible for a long time frame. And then Brett responded, no, as the city council has directed staff to pursue a new or amended gas franchise. I think that makes sense for the Planning Commission to wait that outcome. Any incentive-based approach would be difficult to implement currently in the context of other work priorities, e.g. TC1 or zoning, premiums, or other ordinance changes in the upcoming comprehensive plan. So the concern that I have is that we are putting our eggs in one basket, potentially with a natural gas franchise. And in the meantime, we're continuing to have new construction that is going to be natural gas connected and burning natural gas for a long, long time. So I just wanted to express those publicly. Those are my thoughts. I know that they're shared by others, and I hope that the city actually, in light of Noah's presentation, looks at the first resolve clause and the possible approaches there that would differ from Berkeley. Look at also what it could do in terms of measures to incentivize all electric construction, and not just consider the natural gas franchise. I think it should be doing all three personally. So that's my input, and Councilmember Ricks.
Yeah, thanks. I guess I wanted to provide an update that we are in the midst of developing a resolution around the incentives, the second resolved clause around the incentives. And obviously this is budget season right now. Our next meeting for City Council is a big one in terms of adopting the city's budget. Not to say that this is not an important topic, but that is the focus of staff and council right now. But I would anticipate that we are likely to be seeing that resolution go to council in early June. So that is on staff's radar. It's on the radar.
Excellent news.
Attorney's office, and multiple council members are working on that. So that's an update there. I would also like to note that conversation, obviously everything that we do as council members and staff members and commission members really is open to FOIA, and it's public information, and that's how I operate in terms of everything that goes out as well. But that may not have been, that email communication between a staff member and planning commission, and a planning commission member might have been sort of a point of discussion within planning commission at that point in time. So I guess I would be cautious about, reading those types of emails over and kind of in this setting. I'm not sure it's
just for your information. I asked Shannon if I could read it in this setting. She contacted Brett and Brett fed back that I could.
Okay.
But he asked that I also shared the information about the resolution that was passed last Monday. So
Thank you for saying that. That's helpful. I'm glad that you did that.
yeah.
So anyway, we are working on this. And at least from my perspective, and I think from all the colleagues that I have spoken to, the city has passed a climate emergency. We recognize that. We have adopted 2030 climate neutrality goals. And we have a staff and a city attorney's office that recognizes that this is a priority not only for our community through our adopted plans, but also through council. And so we have a lot of energy and resources directed on this issue, and we're trying to move forward in a way that we believe is the most productive for this moment in time. And that does not mean that the approach that gets made today will be our approach for the indefinite future, but that especially when we're beginning negotiations, we are certainly going to do our part to begin those negotiations in good faith.
Does anybody else have anything that they want to share? Okay, then we will close that agenda item and then go on to commission business. And that means specifically election of officers. As I mentioned in our last meeting, our bylaws limit officers from serving more than 3 years in their individual office. That applies to both Carleen and me. I as chair and Carleen as vice chair. And so what we want to do tonight is elect a new chair and elect a new vice chair. I think it's also appropriate that we review the liaison to the Environmental Commission. That's not officially an office that's governed by the bylaws, but I think it's something that makes sense that we review one more time, or at least on an annual basis, I should say. And so what I thought we would do then first is open up nominations for chair of the commission. We'll take nominations. You can nominate someone else. You can nominate yourself. And so I'd like to open the floor for nominations for chair of the commission. And by the way, after the election, the new officers will assume their roles as of June 1st. Do we have any nominations? Commissioner McComber and traditional Radina first, maybe, or Councilmember Radina, and then Commissioner McComber.
Thank you. I nominate Carleen Colvin Garcia for chair. And can I nominate somebody for vice chair as well?
Why don't we do one at a time?
Okay.
Okay. Carleen, do you accept the nomination?
Thank you so much, Commissioner McCumber. I really appreciate that. And I am going to decline your nomination. Thank you, though.
Councilmember Radina.
I was going to ask if anyone had previously expressed any interest to you leading into this meeting. And if not, we might have an awkward round of people declining nominations. That being said, I'm going to put someone on the spot because I'd already indicated to him that I thought he might be a good chair, and so he can decline us if he's going to, but I'm going to nominate Commissioner Berkowitz. I don't know if I can nominate, actually. I'm going to suggest that someone should nominate.
You're a voting member of the commission, so I would assume that you can.
Thank you, Councilmember Radina. I'm definitely interested, but candidly, I'm at a really interesting point in my life, personally and professionally, and That was not the perfect time for me to step into this role. I also feel a little bit new on this commission. I'm still kind of learning the ropes and the cadence and some of the Roberts rules and behind the scenes things. So I would just like a little bit more time, but I am interested in the future. Thank you, though.
We won't let you forget that, or we won't forget that, I should say. I understand. So I have not been party to any discussions with any commissioners. So I can't shed any light. I understand that there was a conversation between Joe and one commissioner, and I don't know what that led to or any specifics, and I don't think we want to talk about that here. But I just wanted to share that at least from my perspective, there hasn't been any discussions. Carlene and I had a brief discussion about ourselves, and anybody is able to change their mind. I don't know if anybody else had approached Joe or Carlene, but I continue to like to take nominations if anybody else is interested in stepping forward.
I'll nominate Alex.
Commissioner Zimmerman, are you interested?
I think I'm gonna respectfully decline. I appreciate the thought. Thank you.
So I'm gonna nominate someone, and that individual should feel free also to speak their piece. I'm gonna nominate Commissioner Smith. Sharice, are you interested at all in serving?
Thank you very much for the nomination. I am also going to respectfully decline the chair position. That said, I would, maybe interested in the vice chair position. So
good to know. Councilmember Adina.
Yeah, I think that leaves Commissioners McKenna and Overpeck, right? Of people not leaving the commission. So if neither of you raise your hand, we're just going to keep going. So I will nominate Commissioner McKenna.
Sorry, everyone. It's not a great time for me personally, and yeah, I just don't think I can take on the role.
Silence is golden, or in this case, maybe not so golden. We really do need somebody to step up. And I'm a member of another group now where I serve as the vice or the co-lead. And I have to say that, Carlene and I have collaborated a lot. And I think if two people step forward, then you can split duties. I talked in the last meeting about the things that I do. That doesn't mean you have to do all of those things. And that doesn't mean that the chair has to assume all of those duties. You can split them up in terms of preparing for meetings. As I mentioned yesterday, 5 of us met to consider new commission applicants. I did some preparatory work as chair. That doesn't mean that the chair has to do that. That means the chair could delegate those things or just simply reach out an agreement with the co-chair to do that. So I would encourage people to think about stepping forward in light of that. Commissioner McCumber, you want to add some thoughts to that too, hopefully.
So I have an unorthodox idea. John, would you consider accepting a nomination as vice chair? And Sharice, if John accepted a nomination as vice chair, would you reconsider a nomination for chair?
I'll let Sharice answer first.
Again, I'd probably have to respectfully decline, unless, kind of roles and responsibilities perhaps look a little bit different. I heard the, term co-chair. If there is, some, flexibility there, I may reconsider, but again, just want to be mindful of, how much I take on at this time, again, just personally, professionally, and what makes the most sense for me, but absolutely interested in, kind of supporting the commission, the best that I can.
Commissioner McKenna.
Yeah, I just wanted to hear a little bit more about the timeline, like given the stalemate that we seem to have. I mean, I totally get, I think all of us are kind of in a tough spot. I don't know. So yeah, what happens from here? I mean, knowing that we can't spend, another 45 minutes in this place.
Good point. Looks like Councilmember Radina has a great idea that he's excited to share with us.
I don't know that it's a great idea. I just wanted to kind of build on what John has already said, which is that, on top of the fact that, I would say that John is, of all of the chairs that I work with on my commissions, probably one of the kind of the most engaged in leading the commission and puts probably the most time in, I would say. And it's clear that he's really, really passionate about this, but he does really, I would say, go over and above in terms of the work that he puts in. And so I will, and with that, I wanted to acknowledge, I don't believe John is immediately leaving the commission, right? And so John is not leaving, Carlene is not immediately leaving, Erica and I are still here. And Joe continues to be a great support person. And so I hope that no one feels that they have to be as, there will be a significant support system in the five of us in place to help make sure that there is a smooth transition and that whoever steps into this role can step into it comfortably. And that may mean that there's kind of a ramping up period where there is a support network around you, kind of helping you to build towards that, especially as some of these, other professional or personal things that are going on build out. So I don't want you to feel like you're going to step in on day one and everyone else is going to disappear. We will all still be here to support kind of your development as a leader of this body.
Agreed. Commissioner McCoy and then Councilmember Briggs.
Yeah, I'm curious with what like Claire said is if this has to be voted on tonight. I think there's also a handful of people who aren't here from my understanding. I'm not.
Well, there are a few people that aren't here, but actually Commissioner Kerber is not here and he's stepping down, and Commissioner Kendall Coonan is also not here. She's stepping down. Let's see. And I was going to make this acknowledgement later
Harp is
on.
active still.
I spoke with Harp,
being
asked
active.
him about this, and he said he's not interested at this time.
Okay.
Okay, and then perhaps not for, I mean, we didn't get to the environmental commission liaison, but I just wanted to note that I know in the past, like the person who decided to do that was like relatively new. So if there ends up not being someone here interested, I think, we haven't had someone, I think, for a while. So we could also offer that up to, it sounds like there's going to be a lot of new people soon. So I think that's also an option, perhaps not for chair and vice chair, but the third option. So if it doesn't have to be decided tonight.
That would be quite something if we, the mayor nominated someone, council approved them, and we anointed them chair, all in the matter of 1 month. Councilmember Briggs.
Yeah. I just wanted to make sure I formally, we called on everybody around the screen. So Commissioner Overpeck, I don't know if you would consider stepping into the chair role or not.
Thank you, Councilwoman Briggs. I am sorely tempted, but I'm also, I just don't have the bandwidth. I have got a job that is keeping me on my toes. And Ember, stop laughing. And I just can't add more to my plate. We have some amazing opportunities occurring here at the University of Michigan. And I want to be able to do my job and take advantage of them. Thanks though.
Fully understand.
What
Commissioner Levin, we haven't tagged you yet either. Any thoughts or any wisdom you want to share with the rest of the commission too, as far as stepping forward?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm kind of in a similar thinking of other people. I think I have to look at too how much longer my commission goes till. Not that I couldn't potentially renew it. I'm not sure if I'm going to do that, but I actually don't. I think I have maybe a year. Do you know, Joe?
I was just going to say that regardless of anyone's term length, technically the officer positions are all 1 year terms regardless. And, it continues each year. So even if you only have 1 year, that is fine either way. I don't know off the top of my head what your term is, but both for you and for everyone else, you're not committing to serve as chair for 3 years at this point in time. You can certainly choose, if, test it out for a year. If after a year, you're like, that's way too much work, it's fully acceptable to step back at that time. So
exactly,
just noting that for in case anyone's concerned about length of term and all that.
Yep, and no, I know for sure you have at least 1 more year. I don't remember if it's 1 or 2. I think it's either 1 or 2.
Okay, yeah, thanks.
So just as a really quick recap, we have obviously the meetings that the chair and vice chair preside over, with mostly the chair so far with John, but you can actually split it as well between both roles, and with the support of Joe and participation from all of us. As far as the scripts, the setting of the running of the meeting, so John has created these really great structures for like how to run the meeting in scripts. That's something that we can also provide for the incoming chair. So there are templates for the entire role for you to utilize, if you don't want to create them for yourself from scratch. The other thing is there is a monthly meeting that's 30 minutes where we decide on upcoming topics for the meetings based on availability of speakers, based on interest from the commission. And then at the beginning of the year, we have a meeting that we decide on. And you've answered surveys from us requesting topics. So we go over the entire list, and then we decide what we're going to be covering and discussing for the first leg of the year, and then we do that like quarterly. And so it's very contained times that we meet, and so it's not that overwhelming.
Yeah, and just in case it wasn't clear who does what and all that stuff, like everything that gets uploaded to Legistar, everything that gets uploaded and put through that system, like that's on the staff liaison, not a thing that the chair has to worry about, or vice chair or anything like that. So a lot of those administrative processes go through on my end. So
and I don't have to say this, but I will say this: Joe is doing an excellent job as liaison. There were issues in the past with things getting posted to Legistar and things like that. I mean, Joe has been really, really great and consistent. I mean, if you can see for yourself, Legistar is almost always up to date. And if there were, for example, late materials like today with Noah's presentation, that's simply because this was a late request of actually presenting in this forum. And he wanted to put together a slide deck. So there's no reflection whatsoever on Joe. Joe's doing a great job, and he's a great partner for both Carlene and me. It sounds like we have a stalemate, and I don't want to just wait out somebody tonight. That's really not fair. What I would encourage people to do is think about this. We will be bringing on some new members, but I don't think it's fair to ask them to do that. Maybe there's some people that talk amongst you about this. You feel free to talk to me and Carlene Councilmember Briggs and Councilmember Adina, as well as to Joe. I just would say that maybe we leave this for right now. Does anybody have any objections to that? Okay, so why don't we do
Is
that?
anyone kind of close? I mean, if they would really want to have like a partner instead of like, you know, chair, vice chair, maybe two co-chairs, anybody who's kind of close? Everyone's got their poker faces on. Oh, come on. I can see, Claire, you're kind of interested in same in you, Cherise. Yes, a little. And so Alex, you too. I can tell.
I just want a little bit more like personal time to consider it, given my program and everything I have going on in my life.
Understood.
Totally understand.
Alex, did you want to share anything? You had your hand up for a second.
Yeah, I mean, the longer this goes on, to say okay or like do it. But if we wanted to wait till the next meeting, that might be helpful to me to figure out some decisions that I will be making in my personal and professional life in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah. Okay, why don't we do that? I mean, I think we've heard from everybody. There is a significant reluctance, and that's not going to change by having another 5-minute wait or whatever. So I think everybody's sleeping over it. People having an opportunity to talk to each other, that makes a lot more sense. What about environmental commission liaison? Does anybody have an interest in doing that? I mean, why don't we have to go through formal nominations? Is there anybody that's interested in stepping up and taking that on? I mean, I'll volunteer to do it again. It's something that I enjoy, but we've had situations in the past. There was a period where I think it was Edie Juno that served in that role for roughly 18 months before she moved away from the city. And if anybody wants to step forward now, that would be great. I think you'd learn a lot from the opportunity. Again, it's relatively little commitment. There's a meeting once a month, and what you do beyond that is up to you, just like almost any other volunteer role. You're not really taking on any chair kind of roles. Commissioner Levin.
I mean, certainly I'll let you do it, John, but I was going to say I would be interested if no one else other than you wants to do it.
Okay, good. Commissioner Smith.
Yeah, I don't know if this is the right time to bring this up, but perhaps as a future agenda item, if we may consider kind of the overlap in our work with the Planning Commission as well as the Transportation Commission, and think about whether or not it makes sense to have a liaison there as well.
That's something to consider. So why don't we do the following? Why don't we table everything? Noah and I can talk. I have no problem in handing things over to you, Noah, and then you could punt back to me if you're, that doesn't work out. Why don't you and I talk and we handle all this then in next month's meeting? I think I don't know how we work around the bylaws, but we'll just simply say that I'll chair the next meeting. My wife may not be too pleased with that, but that's okay. And hopefully we'll have a better discussion and a few people step forward. So Commissioner Levin, and then Councilmember Redina, and then Commissioner Peck.
Yeah, just another real quick suggestion. I don't know if the bylaws allow this, but maybe we could have some sort of caretaker arrangement where there's like a rotating every month, somebody else does it until we get a permanent person. Just a suggestion. I don't know if that's possible, but.
Okay, something we can talk about. Maybe, I don't know, Joe, you may have to talk to someone in the attorney's office about this. I mean, they've been ones that have written and updated and interpreted the bylaws up until now. Councilmember Redina.
Thanks, and maybe I should defer to Joe, but because I was actually going to suggest also, if anybody has, questions or ideas, if Commissioners McKenna and Smith, if you guys both decide you're kind of interested and maybe would be interested in a co-chair position or something like that, that would probably also require an amendment to bylaws. And so, but if that's something that you're interested in, maybe have a conversation with Joe ahead of time, and that way we could come prepared for that possibility as well at the next meeting. So Joe, I'm maybe offering you up as if anybody has questions or wants to maybe express interest to reach out to you.
Yeah, obviously the time commitment of the chair is not in the meetings, because whether you're chair or not, you're in the meeting just as long as everybody else. So as Carleen said, that kind of work is pretty much per script. And then it depends then on what you do outside the meeting. And that's going to depend on each one of you individually. Commissioner Peck, and then Joe.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, John, thank you so much for being such a good chair. I think you just intimidate us all by being so thorough and dedicated and inspirational. But I also have a solution, and that is you do a name change.
I'll run that by my wife too and see what she says. Well, thanks for the compliment. I appreciate that. Joe, I hope you have another idea that's better even than that one.
Yeah, clearly. No, I don't necessarily have a solution. But I think just in terms of like logistics, because of the way bylaws work, terms work, all that kind of thing, because technically your terms do run through the end of May. So that that at least gives us enough time to under that to kind of set up the next month's agenda, kind of a deal. So we will at least be able to handle that. And I think first thing on the agenda will be the election, so that way we kind of formally move to that. Obviously, like in the meeting, whoever's ends up stepping up and being elected to chair is not going to be required to then run that full meeting, because you will have no notice. Like we can handle that on our ends. We'll figure out some solution for that. But yeah, I will just reach out to make sure to see what kind of things we have on the clerk's office. Again, just looking directly at the bylaws as of right now. Again, officers shall be elected for 1-year terms. So it gives some stuff on like when the votes and stuff should take place. If we're looking at other sort of solutions, it would require an amendment to the bylaws, which are things that can be done. It's just, again, another possibility there. So those are kind of where we're at on that end. Again, just offering up myself, all of us, more than happy to talk to anyone, at literally any time. We can go through kind of what are the requirements, what are some of the, responsibilities, things like that, as well as talk through, time commitments. Obviously, everyone has so many things going on. And these are all valid reasons to not be interested at this point in time, but more than happy to just kind of talk through any of that to see if there's those concerns, if where we can work around with those concerns to kind of find out what kind of options could potentially work. So happy to do that. I think everyone else has offered up that as well. So please reach out to us in this time as we all reflect.
And I'm going to say this with a little bit of jest, but this is to the nominating committee. When we nominate candidates, maybe we need to think that we need to nominate people like me that are retired and have all kinds of free time, that are willing to step forward to serve as chair. Because if we nominate all these really super dynamic people that have families and have jobs and are getting their PhDs, they have other priorities than someone like I do. So maybe that's something to think about going forward. Councilmember Briggs.
A good point. But I just wanted to make sure that I said thank you to you, John, and to Carleen. Really, your leadership on this commission has been incredible, both of you. And I know that you've both spent an incredible amount of time both on subcommittees and in organization of the agendas and on research. And it's apparent, obviously, in terms of how people see the roles stepping into them. And it's been apparent in terms of the outcomes of the commission as well. But I think, you've both done an outstanding job, and really, really appreciate your service to the commission. And for those who are contemplating, what's coming next. As Travis said, please reach out to me, to Travis, to Joe, and we're happy to talk through it with you. Obviously, both Travis and I serve on a number of different commissions, and so we see how the role plays out in a variety of different places. So happy to talk through what your concerns are and what your interests are too, because this is hopefully something that is enjoyable for everybody. So thank you.
It is a pleasure to serve. It's obviously some work, but it's also a pleasure, and so yeah, consider that as well. Okay, so we're going to move on because otherwise we're going to be here all night. Energy report, and then news from each one of the commissioners and from the council members. We'll do it in that order.
Yes, give me 1 second. I think something happened with Trish, who dropped, and re-adding them. Okay. Yeah, reports on OSI side. So one, just because we talked about it both at the last meeting and this one, just wanting to note that the city is going to be hosting a couple listening sessions for folks to share their ideas about the sustainable heating franchise here and what that could mean in Ann Arbor. There'll be currently scheduled meetings are May 11th at 6 p.m. and May 16th also at 6 p.m. You can register on our website. Those will be over Zoom. Also, we'll be looking at additional opportunities to provide feedback outside of those. Those are just the ones scheduled at the moment. And people can also share feedback anytime by emailing franchisefeedback@a2gov.org. So if anyone is interested in learning more and providing feedback, there's a couple opportunities there. Also putting out, because this will happen in advance of our next meeting, but A20 week will be happening in the first week of June. For those unfamiliar, there's a week full of events, some hosted by OSI, some hosted by the various collaborators around just kind of all things that's happening around A20, as well as just all the different sustainability work in the community. There's going to be a lot of different events, pretty much there is at least one event every day. Some days have 2 or 3 events. So keep an eye on the sustainabilities events page to see what events are happening. If you're interested in any of them, we'd love to see you out there. And a last thing I wanted to note, I believe many of you have seen, but for those who have not, just recently, the city of Ann Arbor, we've been selected by the Department of Energy to receive up to $588,000 to design a geothermal heating and cooling system. We'll be designing it in Bryant neighborhood on the city's south side, looking at a loop geothermal system that would be paired with efficiency and rooftop solar. Also looking at battery storage and all that to cover at least 75% of the neighborhood's heating and cooling load. Would also be incorporating the local school in the area, a county community mental health center, and the city's Wheeler Service Center facility, all as part of that. And just to be clear, this is a 2-phase grant from the Department of Energy. The first phase, which is what we were awarded for, is a design phase. So that's what we're going through the negotiations, and we'll be working on with that. All of it is going to be co-designed with residents directly in the neighborhood to make sure everything works for them. And then at the conclusion of the first phase, DOE will look at all the different designs from the different communities they were awarded in phase 1 and down select a certain subset of communities for dollars to do implementation. So right now, just in the design phase, and then, that will last a year. And then after that, there's the potential for implementation dollars on that end. So that is what I have for now.
Thanks, Joe. By the way, I asked Joe to put all of you on the OSI newsletter. So hopefully you're receiving that and getting updates that way as well. And so I encourage you to read that, and that way you don't have to, we don't have to Joe cover each and every one of the points that are in the newsletter in this meeting then too. Updates from the council members.
I feel like we've discussed the thing that I would have given you an update on, which is the requested public legal memo. So I don't think we need to wade into that again. And then just a more general update, we are very much in the midst of budget. So our next, we have budget amendment deadlines this week, and then next council meeting will be the consideration of amendments and adoption of the budget.
I have a quick question on that. I'd sent an email to the two of you, and then I started going through the 400 or whatever pages of the budget and probably made it through 100 or so. I did not see a summary of climate millage spending. Is there a summary of that similar to what the city put out prior to the vote in November, where there was a 2-year budget where there can be a comparison of what the at least pre-vote proposal was versus what is actually proposed in the plan? I didn't see that, like I said. Have either of you seen that?
It's not laid out like that in the budget. In the way there's no comparable page that you could go to, as far as I'm aware, in the budget document that would kind of give you that comparison. It's because they kind of get it put into different buckets in terms of how it's thought of in terms of budgeting terms. Certainly that, and Joe, you may want to speak more to this, but this, it's that is the guiding document in terms of allocations and spending.
I realize things are budgeted on a departmental basis and not by the millage basis. The concern that I have is that the city voted for $7 million in additional spending. The one line item that I saw was that there's an additional 8.5 heads for sustainability. And I assume most of that is going to be in OSI, but there were a whole lot of other, specific kinds of commitments, I guess you'd say. I mean, I think that's the way Missy also portrayed it in a presentation to the Energy Commission, that the city would most likely not be deviating significantly from that 2-year plan. I also saw your question that you submitted, Councilmember Briggs, and I saw the response from city staff, and it just seems to me that the $7 million is just going to be blended in, and no one will have any means of really seeing how the proposed spending is actually being translated into actual spending.
I don't have additional context on like how it fits in with the budget, because I'm not the budget here. But one of the things we are trying to do is be as transparent as possible. Like we said, we changed as little as possible on our end from again what was put before the voters, and trying to report out as best we can. Previously we've done our annual reports every year on what's kind of happening. We plan to continue that going forward, but based around that funding cycle, to as clearly show as we possibly can. Here's where that funding is going, because this was a substantial amount of funding put forth from the community. So we want to make sure we are showing where that funding is going, and how it's being implemented.
Okay. Good. Anything else to add from either council members? Okay, go ahead. Councilmember Briggs, anything?
I was just going to say, I think your point around just making sure that there's transparency and clear communication it's a priority for all of us, to make sure that the community understands how the millage is being spent. And that's certainly a priority as we go through this, and as we have as we have the adopted budget.
Good.
Yeah, and I will also just add, there are a lot of pieces in here. I know that this is the one that you're probably most interested in, given the work on this commission. There are a lot of places where you'll see, a bigger bucket of funds, and you won't see like each individual expenditure in the document that we have. And a lot of that is because some of it is being guided by previously adopted policy. And so in this specific example, we as council have already spoken on how those allocations should be made. And so beyond the additional staff support that may be funded through millage dollars to accomplish some of that work, if there are contracts or things like that need to come forward, those will all come through council, and you will see where those dollars are coming from. And so you will see those allocations as they're being made.
Okay, thank you. I'll give a brief report. on the Environmental Commission. And I wanted to mention one other thing, and then we'll open it up to other commissioners if they have any news. Very, very briefly, Environmental Commission. It passed, as I mentioned, the natural gas resolution that we talked about earlier. It was split in half. And I mentioned that, so I won't go into any more details. The only other thing that was, I think, of significant interest is we had a solid waste update. Brian Stiglitz, Molly, but I'm not going to pronounce his name right, Majewski, and Sarah Mason presented the solid waste budget, both financial. There were a lot of detailed questions that were answered on the finances, as well as some high-level metrics. The one good news is that overall trash to landfill is down for the third year in a row. And if you look at it on a per capita basis, they didn't provide that, but it probably even dropped more on a per capita basis. So that's a good trend. The one thing that I wanted to share, and I'll keep this brief because it is late, but I was going to go into a little more detail. I read a blog post today. It's called Heated. And they reported on the record profits of the fossil fuel industry. Just the top four companies in that are Chevron, Exxon, BP, and Shell. They earned in total, just in the first quarter, over $33 billion in profits. And it was pretty interesting. Exxon, for example, said their record-breaking performance was driven by new volumes of crude oil and fuels from the startup of new offshore developments and refining facilities. And as the author wrote, this is exactly the opposite of ending new fossil fuel developments, which the IEA says is the only way to stabilize the planet at a relatively safe level of warming. And then the other thing that they talked about is that also several of these companies are scaling back their pledges to fight the climate crisis. BP announced in February that it was backing off its promise to lower emissions by 35 to 40% by 2030, lowering it to 20 to 30%. Shell also said it would not increase spending on renewable energy this year, and Exxon pulled back funding from its much advertised LG biofuel effort. So this is just a reminder, what we're all seeing on TV and the media is really contradicted by a lot of the actions of these entities. And then the blog went on and talked about some of the things that what $33 billion could do: end world hunger for a year, end US homelessness for 4 years, fund FEMA's budget for 3 years, buy flood insurance for every home in the state of Louisiana, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this is, you can see what our addiction to fossil fuel is going to, and what it's also not doing. So I thought I'd share that with you, and then open it up for any other comments or news from other commissioners. And if there aren't any, then we'll go to public input. Anybody have anything to share? I know it's probably too late, so. Okay, seeing none. Let me get out my little script here. So this is an opportunity for persons of the public to provide input for up to 3 minutes. If you are watching on CTN, please call 888-788 0099. Sorry, I lost my place there. And then 877-853-5247. And enter the meeting ID 956-8718-7876. This information is also displayed on the meeting agenda and the video feed. City staff will select callers that have raised their hands one by one using the last 3 digits of your phone number. To raise your hand, please press star 9 on your phone. You will hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. And then finally, please state your name and address at the beginning of your comments.
Caller ending in 134.
Thank you, Mr. Lang. Ken Garber, 28 Haverhill Court. Chair Mirsky and Vice Chair Colvin Garcia have been great in their leadership roles. I really thank them both for their many years guiding this commission. You've made a huge difference. Well, thank you. Tonight we heard a fantastic legal analysis of the Berkeley decision from Commissioner Levine, and an excellent discussion. I was glad to hear from Councilmember Briggs that there is some kind of resolution in the works to incentivize all electric new construction. I still think we should aggressively pursue an ordinance, probably a zoning ordinance that would ban new natural gas connections. The gas franchise negotiations absolutely do not substitute for that. We need immediate measures. In March, the city approved 320 gas burning apartments on Pontiac Trail, 78 gas burning townhomes on Platte Road. Last week, a 195 unit, 180,000 square foot gas burning building on Maiden Lane. This month or next, something else, and on and on. So this just can't continue. A city council resolution incentive package is really welcome. I suspect it'll trigger a whole new discussion. A few probably premature comments on this. I would be opposed to the public paying developers to install heat pumps, as was recently done through the Brownfield plan for the village of Ann Arbor for its 164 for sale units. We all have a shared responsibility for addressing climate change, including developers. And it's really little or no sacrifice on their part, except that they have to change the way they do things. The building life cycle costs of electrification are comparable to gas, if not better. And any utility operating cost difference can be mostly wiped out with a combination of on-site solar and energy efficiency measures along the lines of the 2021 IECC. Or passive home standards, even better. Instead of subsidizing developers directly or indirectly, instead we should ensure that their pro formas incorporate the social cost of carbon. For example, as Commissioner Overpeck was suggesting, some kind of tax or fee. Burlington, Vermont, earlier this year,
30 seconds.
Burlington passed a carbon pollution impact fee of $150 per metric ton carbon for new construction. It was approved in a referendum with 67% of the vote. That's the sort of thing I hope to see with the staff recommendations that will be coming in June. Thank you for considering my comments.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Any others?
No further callers.
Okay. Items for the next agenda. So as Carleen mentioned, Joe and Carleen and I had a call last Monday where we talked about a number of possibilities. Joe, do you want to summarize what we see as being up tap, and then we'll take other recommendations?
We don't have any that are necessarily confirmed, but a couple of options that we've talked about as potential, if there's updates on herd, potentially an update on the report or the annual report. Yeah, greenhouse gas inventory, if we have it in time at this point, maybe not super likely. But our annual report from on A20 generally comes out, so we might be able to get something by then.
Right. Okay. Other ideas. So herd was another, that was one of the things that we talked about with Joe that he just mentioned is a possibility. Also, green rental housing program is something that will follow that. We've obviously talked about that in this, and the idea is that the herd resolution, the home energy rating disclosure would come first. Noah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I might have emailed you about this, Sean, but just wanted to put it out on public record. And maybe this is not ripe yet, but maybe at some point. I'm curious to hear from DTE about their new time of day billing and
Yeah.
how that might be affecting energy use.
Yep. Okay, we'll add that to the list. So just before we adjourn, I wanted to recognize, Commissioner McKenna.
Oh, I just wanted to quickly mention on that topic, I've actually run an analysis of the time of use, time of day rate, and have some initial numbers from a really small case study of 50 homes that I could share. Unfortunately, I won't be here in June, but I can either share it and have somebody else present it, or yeah, do it next time.
We could do it in July or later than that. That'd be fine.
Yeah, cool.
Great. So the last thing I wanted to do is recognize the commissioners that are stepping down. First of all, as I mentioned, Commissioner Kendall Coonan is stepping down. She's a youth commissioner, and she's, I think, finished school and going to be moving away. So I want to recognize her for her service. Commissioner Kerber served for 3 years. He's stepping down. He couldn't be with us tonight. He's in Washington State, and he's got family obligations. Then we also had Commissioner McCoy. Thank you very much, Ember, for your service. Ember served 4 years on the commission. And I know that you've been juggling a lot of things between your PhD studies as well as your role as Geo Vice President. So thank you for all your service in those regards. And then finally, I wanted to recognize Commissioner McCumber. Commissioner McCumber has been on the Energy Commission for 13 years. So that is really amazing. That's twice as long as I've been on it. And that's just fantastic to think that we have that level of commitment and that level of continuity that's been on the commission. And that's been very helpful, I think, to me and all of us. And we really appreciate, Bridget, your service. And thank you very much. And thank you again to all 4 of you for your service on the commission, but especially to you, Bridget. Thanks very much. So, did you want to say anything?
Oh, I just wanted to say thank you, John, and thank you to everybody for serving. It's such important work, so
right.
It's an honor.
Yeah. And with that, thank you, all of you, for your service. Again, thank you especially to our council members who are probably just about meeting out today. And with that, it is what time? I gotta see, look at my watch, 8:58, and I declare this meeting adjourned. And I'm going to ask all of you again to sleep over the chair and vice chair position so that we have somebody that leads this group going forward. Thanks very much and have a great rest of your evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.